Mr. Nelson, you were incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons more than once, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember your entrance date or your first time, the date that you first went into prison?
I believe it was in January of 1995.
Okay. And how long were you in prison during that incarceration?
Until October 29th, 2008.
When did you return to incarceration?
After that, it was July of 2009.
And how long were you incarcerated at that time?
Until November of 2010.
And were you incarcerated again after that?
11 days later, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so from November of 2010 until when were you released?
December 19th of 2016.
Okay. In court so far, we've heard a lot about what the records show and what you have told previous experts about your experience in prison. But there are some additional things that you think it's important for the jury to know. Is that right?
I think it would be fair, yeah.
Okay. While you were in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, can you tell us about incidents in which the sprinkler system or fire alarms were purposefully turned on?
Yeah, that's a very common occurrence in the special housing unit or segregated housing unit. It's basically a unit with hundreds of inmates, most of which are 2 men per cell. And there's hundreds of them. And people get frustrated. The officers like to be devious and play games, aggravate. It's part of their job. It's part of deterrence. It's part of what they're trained to do, get the inmates going. So in retaliation, many inmates will break the sprinklers. I've never done that myself.
I'm sorry, I don't mean
Sure.
to interrupt, but when the sprinklers are broken, can you sort of explain what happens?
Certainly. For the first several minutes, black water, fire retardant, comes out of these sprinkler systems in order to stop the fire. But then hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water continue to flow, as well as the fire alarm is an ear-shattering, piercing sound that they keep going for up to 4, 5, 6 hours. Even though they know there's no fire, they keep as part of your punishment for someone having done this. Of course, it floods your cell, and it floods my cell and everyone else's cell. So you're ankle deep in fire retardant, dirty water, and a lot of inmates flush their toilets. Feces, urine is mixed in with the mush, and you're ankle deep in that stew, and you're stuck there for upwards of 24 hours until you pick up the mess.
So in your experience at the Federal Bureau of Prisons, when that would happen, you had to clean it up yourself. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely.
Were you provided any sort of cleaning supplies or protective gloves or anything like that?
Never.
Okay. Something else that you thought was important was interactions with the SORT team.
Right.
Is that correct? Can you tell us about that?
The SORT team is a special operations response team. And basically, they dress up like football players in riot gear, and they'll run into a cell if they don't shoot you with a pepper ball gun, just like a paintball gun, but it shoots pepper gas, and it bruises your skin and does all kind of damage to you, and it chokes you. And you know, it's in order to quell a unruly or violent inmate. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they use it for other reasons as well.
If your cellmate was being unruly or violent and they decided to do this, would you be affected by those pepper balls?
Yeah, whatever your cellmate does, you're riding with him because you're just as culpable as he is. No matter what he does, you can be a saint, and whatever punishment he gets, you're getting because you're in the cell.
There was another incident in which you were locked in a cell in Leavenworth, which is a facility. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. There's actually been books written about this one particular unit in the oldest, or one of the oldest penitentiaries in America, Leavenworth, Kansas. I think a lot of people have heard that name before. The hot house, the book is. There's no fans, there's no air conditioning, and there's no heat. It's Kansas. It's very, very hot in the summertime there, and very, very cold in the winter. And in the unit, there's pigeons, hundreds of pigeons flying around the unit. Of course, there's feces all over the windows. Cockroaches everywhere, rats, I mean the size of hamsters. The cops brutalize the inmates on the regular. I was up on the 5th tier, so there's no windows, there's nothing. It's 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And the treatment that you receive is brutal.
You also indicated that well, let me ask you this. There was a long period of time where you were kept in special house or segregated housing units. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you saw when Mr. Gravett showed us the diagram. Is that right?
It's very accurate of the Florence, Colorado.
Okay. And
Florence, Colorado, U.S. Penitentiary.
And that would have been one of the places that you were kept in segregation. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you were in segregation, were there times where you were in the unit entirely alone?
Yes.
Were there times when you had one cellmate?
Yes.
Were there times when you had two cellmates?
Yes.
So there were times when there was a total of 3 people within the confines of what we saw in that diagram. Is that right?
Absolutely, for months at a time.
When you were in the segregated housing units at any of the various facilities you were at, did you ever witness a murder?
Several, yes.
And did those happen? Well, when you say several, can you give us a number? Is it 1 or 2 or?
3. I've witnessed 3 murders in the years I've been incarcerated.
And when you say witness, did you actually see that happen?
2 of them, yes. 1 of them immediately after the fact.
Okay, so you've heard that the doctors and such have said that the information they have is from you, and then some other documents that are trying to corroborate the things you're saying. Is that right?
Yes.
And an important part of all of this for you has been that you have a trial within your right to a speedy trial. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you knew that in doing that, we may not be able to get some of those corroborating
Objection,
documents.
Your Honor, irrelevant.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
I believe, did the witness answer, Madam Clerk? No.
For that reason, were you asked to get brain scans?
Yes, I was.
Objection, irrelevant.
I'll overrule the objection to that question.
You can answer something.
Yes, I was.
Did you refuse to do that?
Yes, I did.
And why did you refuse?
I didn't want to delay in the trial.
And you saw Dr. McLean testify, right?
Yes, I did.
And you spoke with her a couple times at previous to her testimony, right?
Yes, I did.
And were you concerned about cooperating with her because it might delay the trial?
At one point, yes, I was very concerned about it.
Okay. And Dr. McLean testified about a sexual assault that happened while you were in the Bureau of Prisons. Is that right?
There was a couple of them, yes,
Okay.
fortunately.
And did you experience a sexual assault in 2015?
Yes, I did.
Can you, in as little detail, you don't have to go into it too much, explain generally what happened?
Well, it was the end of October, and it went into the beginning of November of 2015, and I was at a medium security institution in Gilmore, West Virginia, federal prison, about 1,000 inmates or more. And an inmate invited me into his cell, which is very common, share some food, different things, talk. And the next thing I know, I was coming to. An officer was waking me up. I was beaten up by my cellmate, which wasn't the person who invited me into the cell, but it's kind of sketchy for me because I was unconscious. But I was raped. It wasn't the first time this has happened. It happened years before as well. Prisons are very violent.
Did you ask for, at some later point, some sort of special testing or treatment because of the sexual assault?
Yes, I asked for blood testing, for HIV and hepatitis C.
And did you get that testing done?
Yes, my entire life I had been negative for hepatitis C, but all of a sudden now I'm positive for hepatitis C. With no treatment.
Did you file or write letters or a lawsuit about that incident?
Oh, yes, I did. Matter of fact, I had documentation that I was blood tested just a month prior to the rape, and then I was blood tested a month after, and I put them together. One was negative, one was positive, put it together on a lawsuit, and I sent it to the federal jurisdiction in the West Virginia, and I filed a lawsuit on it. I subsequently withdrew the lawsuit for better treatment.
Better treatment, is that what you
Yes.
said? While you were in custody, did you file other lawsuits?
I filed many lawsuits, never frivolous.
And did you also write letters to different people of authority that may be able to help you?
Oh, absolutely. United States Representative, and then later Senator Bernard Sanders, and Charles Schumer, New York and Vermont.
And when you were writing letters and lawsuits, was that about the treatment and conditions that you were faced with in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Always conditions of confinement.
Since your incarceration in the Orange County Jail, you've continued to write letters to people about your treatment. Is that right?
Right.
And you've continued to do that, send them to law enforcement officers or the state attorney's office. Is that right?
Yes.
Even after attorneys have suggested you don't do that.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to ask you a couple of things about just sort of your interactions with other people or when you're trying to express yourself. When you're talking or listening to other people talk, do you find it difficult to deal with interruptions?
Yes, it's actually painful for me.
Does that cause you to have a hard time staying focused on what's being talked about or asked?
Yeah, it makes me almost break down. I mean, not in a crying type of manner. It makes me break down where I can't think. I just become, like I can't handle 2-3 questions at the same time. It just doesn't work.
Do you ever feel like your brain is going faster than your ability to speak the thoughts?
Yes.
Do you ever or often struggle with getting stuck or fixated on a specific topic?
Yes.
Does that happen even when someone is trying to discuss something else with you?
That's true.
Does it keep you from being able to have a conversation with someone else because all you can think about is this other thing?
Yes.
Judge, may I just have one moment?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the clerk?
Yes.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
For the record, I'm approaching with what's been marked as defense exhibit Q for identification. I'm showing you this. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
How, or have you seen it before?
Yes, I have.
When did you first see it?
When United States Senator Bernie Sanders sent it to me.
Okay. And that was while you were incarcerated?
That's true.
Okay. And is this a accurate copy of the letter that you received when you were in the Federal Bureau of Prisons?
Yes, that's an accurate copy. There's actually more to it as well, other pages that are involved, but that is the gist of it.
Judge, at this time, the defense would move what's been previously marked as identification Q into evidence, and I'm not sure the number, as to defense 14.
Mr. Nolly,
We object on relevancy grounds, Your Honor.
could I see the?
Yes. Yeah, Judge.
The objection is overruled. What's been marked for identification is defendant's Q. For identification is admitted in evidence as defendant's exhibit 14.
That letter was a response from the warden to Senator Sanders, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was after one of the many letters that you had sent him?
Yes, inquiries which he took and sent to Congressional Affairs, Federal Bureau of Prisons, Central Office, Washington.
This specific issue was about your second, or your need for your second colostomy procedure, is that correct?
Yes.
And were you concerned that you wouldn't get that second procedure before your release?
Oh, absolutely. It was what passed overdue.
Did you get that second procedure before your release?
No, they failed to give it to me.
Okay. Judge, may I just have one moment?
Yes.
Do you currently, because you didn't get the second procedure, have to wear a colostomy bag?
That's correct.
And when you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that was the case, is that right? The status that you had?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons, did they release you with any medical equipment or any treatment or help with being able to take care of that colostomy bag?
Well, yes, they did, but how I got to that point is another matter.
Okay. So when you got out, you had an extra bag or so, is that correct?
Oh, yeah, they gave me those.
Okay. When you got out, you ultimately, I think we talked about in the last phase of the trial, became homeless. Is that right?
Ultimately, I did.
Yes. And while you were homeless, were you still having to deal with this colostomy bag?
Yes.
Judge, I don't have any other questions.
Cross-examination?
Mr. Nelson, how long did you keep Jennifer Fulford in the car before you killed her?
Your Honor, I object to outside scope of direct.
I'll sustain the objection.
You were on felony probation at the time you killed Jennifer Fulford, weren't you?
Your Honor, I'm also going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
You had previously been convicted of bank robbery when you killed Jennifer Fulford, hadn't you?
And again, I'm going to object to outside scope of direct.
Sustain the objection.
You murdered Jennifer Fulford to avoid her testifying against you, didn't you? May we approach her on
Outside
her?
of scope of direct, and I'd ask to approach.
Counsel? You don't argue in front of the jury.
Yes, sir.
Roach.
All right, we just saw it getting heated there in the courtroom between the two attorneys, defense attorney Sarah Moore and prosecutor Ken Nunley. We're on cross-examination. The prosecutor was trying to draw out those bad facts that Scott Nelson was on federal probation when he murdered Jennifer Fulford, that he was convicted for bank robbery, and that he murdered her to prevent her from testifying against him. And you saw Sarah Moore objecting to each of those questions, and her basis was that those questions were outside the scope of direct examination, meaning that it was outside of what she put on in the questioning of her client, Scott Nelson. And the judge was sustaining all of those objections, getting very heated because he could see Ken Nunley wasn't stopping there. He was going to keep continuing because you're getting it all out there in front of the jury. He may not be eliciting answers, but the jury's hearing all of these horrible facts about Nelson being on federal probation for having the bank robbery crime and for the murder of Jennifer Fulford, possibly the motivation being to prevent her from testifying, which could be one of the aggravating factors here that the state is trying to prove to get that death sentence. They only need one aggravating factor to prove one factor in order for him to be eligible to receive the death penalty. So now they're at sidebar discussing all of this. This is quite contentious, and I see what the defense did here. They kept it really tight. As I was watching this, I'm thinking I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, like there's got to be more, there's got to be more. They kept it very tight as a matter of strategy so that the prosecutor can't elicit more information on cross. They're walking back to the tables. Let's listen back in now live.
I could have Exhibit 14. Mr. Nelson, you testified about Defendant's Exhibit 14, which is a letter from a warden to Senator Sanders. Are you familiar with the contents of that letter, or do you need to look at it again?
Very familiar with it.
And in that letter, the warden states that you would not be released to a halfway house until your medical issues were resolved. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
But it's your belief, I suppose, that the Federal Bureau of Prisons somehow altered your release date?
Yes, they did.
And they did that despite telling Senator Sanders that they would not do so.
Can you imagine? Yes, they did.
So that's your opinion.
No, I can prove it.
That's your testimony under oath here today.
Yeah, I can prove it.
And how many felonies have you been convicted of, Mr. Nelson?
6, I believe, in total.
Was that before last week?
Do you want me to answer that question first? Proved, or you don't want me to discuss that?
When you testified previously, you had been convicted of 6 felonies, hadn't you?
Why are you shifting the conversation? We were just talking about me proving something, and now you don't want me to prove it because I can. Now you want to change the subject. You don't think that?
No, Mr. Nelson, I asked you how many felonies you had
And I was
convicted
honest.
of
I
as
said
of...
6. And you thought I only had 3. I cleared the air for you and told you I had 6.
Rule the objection.
If you'd stop being so snippy, I'm more of a help to you than a hindrance.
Yeah, why don't you help me out, sir? What do you want to tell me?
I know, stop being snippy. I've been convicted of 6 felonies. I'm institutionalized. I've been treated like an animal for 25 years. And I've been brutalized. Had everything. There's nothing that you can dream up that hasn't been done to me in federal custody. Nothing. Everything.
Now, Mr. Nelson, you would admit that you have given different versions to different people about whether or not you were sexually assaulted, wouldn't you?
It all depends. You have to understand. I mean, that's a very prison sex is like an oxymoron. It's like, there's taboo. There's all kinds of ramifications and crazy things going on here when that becomes in conjunction with the other word. So yeah, I mean, you can't tell everybody the truth, and you can tell some, and you better not tell others. You better know what you're doing, because it's politics and you're liable to end up dead.
So you have told some of the mental health professionals that you were sexually assaulted in prison? haven't you?
Yes.
You have not told all of them the same thing, have you?
It's impossible to, because they'll put you in a bad situation.
So you have misled certain mental health examiners. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I haven't misled anybody. I've been very vocal and very honest and forthcoming with the facts of those assaults. As a matter of fact, so forthcoming that the captain in the Federal Bureau of Prison, a very high-ranking official, was terminated for having set me up to have me raped at U.S. Penitentiary Lompoc in 2002, sir.
Which penitentiary, sir?
United States Penitentiary, Lompoc, California.
And which warden was that, sir?
I can't remember what warden, and I can't remember the captain's name. But the captain said, and this is like 1 in a million for him, a captain, to come to a segregated housing unit and walk up to an inmate and say, you know what? I got a cellmate for you, and I'm going to say he's coming. You're going to have a cellmate tomorrow. My personal favorite, whatever the words were.
Now, Mr. Nelson, you
And I got
testified.
raped. He lost his job.
Okay, and what year was this, sir?
2002, sir.
Yeah, you testified that you were released from the Federal Bureau of Prisons on December the 19th, 2016. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And that was to a halfway house in Orlando, or in this area.
Yes, sir.
Now, ultimately, you were employed in Orlando, weren't you?
Employed? Yeah,
You got a job, didn't you?
many, many months later.
Okay, you worked for about 6 weeks, I think it was, right? And that was painting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you were provided with a place to live, weren't you?
Provided, I was given charity.
And that was a dry place to sleep, wasn't it?
Well, showering with a garden hose in the alley. Yeah, I guess you could say it was a dry place.
So you were somewhere inside, out of the elements when you went to sleep at night, weren't you, sir?
It wasn't raining on me, I could say. Yes.
And you lived there for about 6 weeks, didn't you?
Yep.
And you ultimately left that employment about September the 5th, didn't you?
You're going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'll overrule the objection on that particular question.
Because of my federal probation officer.
Okay, and what did your federal probation officer do that caused you to leave employment on September the 5th of 17?
You're going to object to outside scope of direct.
I'll overrule the objection to that question.
Well, what federal probation officers do is they're supposed to drug test you. And he drug tested me, see if I was dirty. I was never dirty. And he even said that, you know, you're allowed 5 dirties. I'll give you 5 dirties, Nelson, to like trying to get you on drugs. Anyway, so he shows up at my work because he has to verify where I work and where I live. I was released out of Seminole County Jail. I had no clothes, no shoelaces, no colostomy changes. I had no money, no family, no friends, no nothing. I'm walking down the street with nothing. The federal supervised release officers, the court didn't even know I was released from jail. Out of the righteousness, I show up at their doorstep.
You're going to object to narrative non-responsive.
What's the
Overrule
question?
the objection.
And so I ended up going to the federal building and said, hey, guys, I'm here. And they were like, couldn't believe I was actually there. I mean, they're like, so my federal supervised release says, you know, what are you going to do? And he helped me over at the shelter, get in there. So now I'm in the shelter, been there about 2 months, walking around the streets of Orlando, Florida with nothing, no money, no connections, no nothing. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, out of the kindness of their heart, didn't forward my birth certificate and social security card, which I paid for, which I should have had, which is my right to have, but they decided to lose it on me. Of course, you know, sending someone to the street with nothing, with a colostomy, with a felon, and now no ID, no identity on top of it. I mean, is there is there any other way you can make it possibly harder? I mean, there's no other way. Okay, but that's what they do. I mean, they're good at it. Until days like this where I get to say something and people listen. And I can prove everything I'm saying. So anyway, the probation officer, this wonderful man by the name of Julio Dominguez. Oh, he's such a charming man. Good bona fide federal employee. So he decides to show up at my work. Now, you see, I'm supposed to admit to my employer that I'm a felon, which I did, in application and in verbal interview. I said, I've been convicted of armed bank robbery. That's it. That's as far as I needed to. I satisfied the law. And I made the mistake of being honest with Mr.
I'll sustain the objection.
After you told your employer that you had been convicted of bank robbery, what did you do next?
I informed my probation officer that I've found a place to live and I found employment. And ironically, it's the same place.
Okay. So your employer gave you somewhere to live?
Yeah,
Okay. And you lived there for about 6 weeks, didn't you?
right.
And you were getting paid, weren't you?
I received 2 checks.
You got your last check on September the 15th, didn't you, of 2017?
I've been objecting to outside scope of direct.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
When did you receive your last check, Mr. Nelson?
Your Honor, it's the same question, same
I'll
objection.
sustain the objection.
Did you receive your final paycheck?
Your Honor, again, essentially same question, same objection.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Were you compensated completely